Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano. I've been doing the ketogenic diet for 7 years, and I'm going to review in this video a study that apparently proves the ketogenic diet is unhealthy. Alright, so a subscriber sent me this study. It's called Glucose and Lipid Homeostasis and Inflammation in Humans Following an Isocaloric Ketogenic Diet. So I normally don't review individual studies. I don't like cherry picking studies on my YouTube page. I like to talk more about the mechanics of the ketogenic diet. But in this case, I wanted to talk about this one because this is an example of one of the straw man studies you're going to see out there that seem as if they, discredit the ketogenic diet, but in reality they're really kind of just bullshit. So I'm just going to preface this by saying doing a ketogenic diet in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, right? It's just a state for your metabolism. There's plenty of healthy ways to do any kind of diet, the ketogenic diet being one of them. You can do a clean keto or inflammatory or dirty keto, or there's plenty of ways to do it right and wrong. And this is definitely including one of the wrong ways. And additionally, they don't even mention what they were feeding these people, which additionally, gives me a little bit more of an inclination to think that it's almost as if this study was set out to try to trash keto, in my opinion. But I don't know individually what the hell was going on here. So I'll get right into it. Basically, they took 17 men and they put them on 4 weeks of a baseline diet, followed by 4 weeks of an isocaloric ketogenic diet, so of the same calories but ketogenic metabolism. And then they measured their responses after giving them meals that were basically of the baseline diet and then of the ketogenic diet. So then they measured their blood markers, okay? So here's the deal. Here is the macro ratio of the baseline diet. So we don't know what they were feeding these people. Maybe they list it if you buy the article, but I highly doubt that. I almost feel like they would list something like that on the abstract and the most of the document here. But the baseline diet was 15% protein, 50% carb, and 35% fat. So basically, a diet that nobody would ever fucking do if they had a brain, okay? Well, here's the deal. I've had people come to me because they've been prescribed macros like that by a doctor because they're suffering from anorexia or they're malnourished and they need to add fat. I've had doctors prescribe that to people. I've been told by people I've helped with plans where they needed to add weight. Okay, so this is literally high carb, high fat, and low protein is a recipe to get fat. It really is. If you need to add weight as quick as possible, that's going to do it for you. But then again, I don't know their calories here because it isn't listed. Followed by 4 weeks of an isocaloric ketogenic diet, which is even more horrendous. 15% protein, 5% carb, and 80% fat. So just as some context here, which I feel like this study is kind of shading keto in a bad light, just blanketing all types of ketogenic diets under one, and maybe misleading people who don't know much about it. So 15% protein is ridiculously low, especially after coming from 4 weeks of 15% protein just prior to this with a high sugar and high fat diet. Well, high fat for carb metabolism. So basically they took 15% protein for men with BMIs higher than my own, so bigger than me at 6 foot, 180, 10% body fat, and they give them 80% fat, 5% carb. So even epileptic children, who the ketogenic diet was originally formulated for because it helped them with their epilepsy, would have better ratios of protein than this. They would have 80% fat and 20% protein and almost no carb because they needed to maximize ketones so they wouldn't have seizures, and even their protein was higher. So this is already a ketogenic diet that not even somebody with the most serious medical conditions would do. And then they also took these measurements of their blood and their inflammatory markers after giving them a carb meal and then a non-carb meal. So unless they had these people hop back on the ketogenic diet for a couple weeks and then measure their markers, this makes absolutely no sense. So just because you eat a ketogenic meal doesn't mean you're in ketosis. I could eat eggs and bacon. That doesn't mean I'm in ketosis if I'm eating carbs or if I just ate a control meal. So this is also a very weird way to slip in that they broke ketosis and then gave them a meal that had ketogenic macros, right? And one more thing I'll say before I read the results of what showed up in these blood markers, okay? 15% protein and 80% fat and 5% carb is not only difficult to achieve on a ketogenic diet, but it'd be very hard to eat nutrient-dense foods and get that macro ratio, because any nutrient-dense food, which is typically, grass-fed animal products, wild fish, right? And pastured egg and pork products and things that are fall in their natural diet, so luxury meat products, right, basically, and organic vegetables, those types of things, eating that consistently will not get you that low of a protein at such a high fat. You can even eat the most fatty, nutrient-dense livers, and you're not going to end up with such a low protein and high fat and still amount of carbs in there. It's very strange, and really it makes no sense to me for them to have been eating any sort of healthy types of foods, which we, again, don't know what they were eating, which is also very strange. I wouldn't be surprised if there were, they don't isolate any inflammatory foods. There's no mention of removing omega-6 fats. There's a little bit of clarity. All problems in your body are basically going to come from inflammation or oxidative stress, and there are certain types of fats that are pro-inflammation, so these are called omega-6 fats. And some of these other types of fats, like processed fats, basically can increase inflammation and oxidative stress. And if you were trying to get somebody to, have more inflammatory markers in their blood, I'd probably be giving them lots of vegetable oil. And again, we don't know what is in their diet. Processed vegetable oils, canola oil, seed oils, things like that are exposed to very high temperatures, and they have a long, unstable chain, so like their fatty acid chain. So basically this causes a lot of problems, and if I was trying to get somebody to be inflamed, I would give them that. And I mean, if I also wanted them to have 15% protein, I wouldn't be giving them nutrient dense, fatty, healthy animal products, right? So basically that's just something that stands out to me. Okay, now for the results. Basically, all of their markers that are related to ketosis increased. However, then we have LDL cholesterol, which is typically referred to as the bad cholesterol, and C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker, were significantly increased on the ketogenic diet. So those two stand out to me the most, and I was particularly interested in the C-reactive protein because C-reactive protein, like I said, is an inflammatory marker, but it's one where it's pretty influenced by insulin. And because the ketogenic diet inherently reduces your insulin, right? Because not eating carbs is going to reduce your insulin because insulin's released in response to carbs, in addition to all food. Basically, I'm surprised they could have increased C-reactive protein, an inflammatory marker, while having lower insulin. So to me, maybe this is because they just took these measurements after giving them a control meal, so a carb meal, and a ketogenic meal, so a non-carb meal. And basically, if this was obtained after the ketogenic meal, this would have been after a ketosis was broken and then not really maintained, just given a ketogenic meal, which had more fats. So basically, this would just be a smaller scale version of the carb metabolism with high fats. That's basically what it would be. So it'd basically just be a smaller scale version of the baseline diet. But additionally, hey, maybe there's plenty of, maybe this was completely due to the fact that it was the ketogenic diet, right? But particularly to the one they were prescribed, because you guys have to understand, ketosis is a metabolic state. Just because somebody has certain blood markers in a metabolic state doesn't mean the whole metabolic state, it has to be thrown out. Okay, we don't know what they were eating. They were probably eating inflammatory foods based off the, bits of evidence I was able to pick out there, and also because of how silly this study was kind of set up as. But an increase in cholesterol and inflammatory markers, I mean, like I said, we don't know what they're eating. I'd like to think they were giving them inflammatory foods or weren't necessarily avoiding them. They also took their measurements after breaking ketosis and getting them into carb metabolism, and even if they measure that after the ketogenic state, that does not mean that the whole ketogenic state has to be thrown out here, guys. There's plenty of healthy ways to do any diet and plenty of unhealthy ways to do any diet. This would be like me doing a study basically where I gave people unhealthy food, right? Bear with me here because I'm not saying they did that on this one. But if I gave somebody unhealthy food and then said the whole carb metabolism is flawed. No, it's just because that we know their macro ratios doesn't mean that we know exactly what those macro ratios consisted of in terms of nutrient quality, in terms of inflammatory foods, anti-inflammatory foods, oxidative stress resulted, right? In general, studies like this are ones that I'm very skeptical of, just because of what the motivations were. But on top of that, it's just one that you should look at, and there are plenty of other studies that are way better and way more informative on keto and carb metabolism than this one. I don't know why it would be such a convoluted study on this diet, especially because we know what works or what is getting praised in a ketogenic metabolism. If there's ever a study on a fat-adapted keto individual showing increased inflammatory markers, and we know what they eat, right, and they weren't just made to transition from a shittiest diet in the world, macros that nobody would ever do, and then transition them to a very, very malnourished ketogenic diet, right? It basically makes you think that maybe this isn't the best source to judge the ketogenic diet from, okay? And additionally, just because even if they had proved outright that this ketogenic diet was the worst thing for inflammatory markers in the world, if they had proved that, even in that event, it doesn't speak on behalf of the whole ketogenic metabolism. It's just a metabolic state, and it means nothing about all ketogenic diets altogether. I could do a ketogenic diet of only eating oil. I could only eat olive oil, and then you could take my blood markers, and then I could say that, the whole ketogenic metabolism is bad for you, right? At the same time, I could do an all-carb diet and only eat sugar and make the same claim. And last thing I'll say is that with regards to any sort of diet that removes a entire macronutrient, there has to be accommodations, basically compensations made to accommodate that restricted macronutrients. So if you cut out carbs, you have to increase your fats, right? If you cut out fats, you have to increase your carbs. And even energy-wise, if you are reducing 2 macronutrients, you are really fucking yourself up. Okay, if you're dropping basically no protein and no carbs, that's a very, it makes sense that that's not going to be the best for your body, even if they want to set it up in such a convoluted way. So dropping your protein to 15% and then dropping your carbs to 5 is basically just an all-fat diet, which I don't think anybody has ever advocated for. And additionally, even with the baseline diet, which is not representative of health at all, nor do we know what it consisted of in terms of food and nutrient quality, again, it's really the epitome of something that we would not want to do. So I almost feel like they set it up so that there would be this contrast between healthy and unhealthy, right? They could literally take that diet and then starve people, because that's what the ketogenic diet they gave them would do. And from there, it would make their blood markers show an increase in inflammation because of how unhealthy these people were probably being set up in the first place. But that's just my 2 cents on this study. I could go more in detail to it, guys, but in general, I think you get the gist. It's really one that doesn't offer much in general anyways. If it was one on a I'm looking for more fat-adapted studies. I'm trying to create a push for more of those because that's where most of the health benefit is. But, I'm not as a zealot, guys. There's no right or wrong way to eat entirely. And I'm not one of the people who thinks that keto is going to cure everything and make your dick bigger and whatever. There's plenty of healthy ways and unhealthy ways to do any sort of diet, and ketogenic diet's one of them. So overall, leave me a question if you'd like me to answer you. I'd answer everybody in the comments. And additionally, if you want to do a 60-day keto transformation, I have a challenge with prizes in the description, and also a free training and meal plan. So, thank you for watching. My name is Anthony Romano. Peace.